He built the most dominant physique bodybuilding had ever seen, 6 Mr. Olympia titles, and a back so wide and thick that judges said it changed the sport forever. Decades later, the man who created that body said that chasing that muscle had been a mistake, not the wins, not the titles, but the chasing itself. The story of Dorian Yates was never really about muscle, it was about escape. Dorian Yates was born in Solihull, England in 1962, and spent part of his childhood on a farm outside the city. His father died of a heart attack when Dorian was 13, and not long after, his family moved into Birmingham. As a teenager, Yates found himself on the wrong side of the law, and ended up spending time in a young offenders institution. It was there that he first discovered weight training. He found something in the gym that he hadn't found anywhere else: control. A place where effort produced results, where the outside world couldn't interfere, and where nobody could take away what he built with his own hands. This was a teenager processing grief and instability, locked up with nothing to build except his own body, who chose to spend his time doing something constructive. Yates wasn't destined for greatness in the way that origin stories about dominant athletes often suggest. He built the path himself, starting from about as far back as a person can start. By the time he was out and working construction jobs around Birmingham, Yates was training with an intensity that stood out. He started training properly at a gym in the city centre in 1983, and within a year he had won a regional title. 2 years later, he became the British heavyweight bodybuilding champion. His approach to training differed from that of most of his contemporaries. Most bodybuilders in the 1980s followed high-volume routines, with sets on top of sets and hours in the gym chasing the pump. Yates went the opposite direction. Influenced by the training philosophy of Mike Mentzer, he stripped his workouts down to short, high-intensity sessions, pushing each set to complete failure before stopping. On paper, it looked minimal. In practice, it built one of the most formidable physiques ever seen on a bodybuilding stage. The Mentzer connection extended beyond training philosophy. Yates would go on to work directly with Mike and his brother Ray in the years that followed, building a business relationship on top of the training approach they had given him. In a sport where most competitors guarded their training methods closely, Yates openly credited someone else's system for shaping his own. He took an approach that most of the bodybuilding establishment considered fringe, applied a level of intensity that few others could tolerate, and won 6 consecutive world championships with it. Less volume, fewer sets, and shorter workouts produced more mass, more density, and more conditioning than the sport had previously seen. There is a reason people started calling him the Shadow. Yates didn't play the promotional game the way other bodybuilders did. He wouldn't confirm whether he was competing until he actually showed up backstage with no build-up, no countdown clock, and no teaser posts, since this was long before social media even existed. He would simply appear, compete, dominate, and then disappear from the public eye again until the next contest. In an era where visibility was everything, Yates built his reputation on the exact opposite: mystery. Fans didn't know what he was doing between shows, how he trained, how he prepped, or what his plan was. All they knew was that when he stepped on stage, he was bigger and harder than anyone else in the building. That mystery became part of the legend, but it was the physique itself that changed the sport. Before Yates, the ideal bodybuilding look was still rooted in symmetry and aesthetics. Big, yes, but balanced, almost sculptural. Yates moved away from that blueprint. He brought a level of sheer mass combined with what people in the sport described as granite hardness that nobody had displayed at that size before. He is widely credited as the man who kicked off the mass monster era of bodybuilding, the shift toward the massive, ultra-conditioned physiques that would define the sport for the next 2 decades. Once Yates showed it was possible, an entire generation of competitors changed their approach trying to catch up to him. From 1992 to 97, Yates did something almost no one else in the sport's history has done. He won 6 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles against some of the most dangerous competition bodybuilding has ever produced. Kevin Levrone, Sean Ray, and Flex Wheeler, all of them elite, all of them hungry to dethrone him. Yates beat every one of them. Every year he competed, without a single loss between 1992 and his retirement. Only 3 other men in bodybuilding history can say they retired while still holding the Olympia title. Yates is one of them. He did not lose the crown, he walked away wearing it. His professional record across those years is almost entirely one-sided. 15 major contest wins stand against only 2 second-place finishes over his entire career. From 1992 onward, he did not lose. This wasn't only a matter of judges scoring a physique on a checklist. Other legends of the sport openly acknowledged what he had built. Years later, fellow bodybuilding veteran Rich Gaspari cited Yates's back development as the gold standard when assessing a modern Olympia champion's conditioning, an indication of how far the reputation of the Shadow extended. In 2003, the IFBB formally inducted him into its Hall of Fame, a recognition that by that point simply confirmed what was already understood. Behind that dominance was a level of physical punishment that most fans never saw, and for years never fully understood. To build and maintain a physique like his, Yates has openly admitted to using anabolic steroids and other performance-enhancing substances for roughly 12 years, from the mid-1980s until his retirement in 1997. He has spoken candidly in interviews about the specific compounds and doses he used during his competitive years, details that at the time were rarely discussed so openly by a top-level bodybuilder. What set his account apart was not only the candor, but the rule he says he set for himself from the beginning. This was a tool for his career, not a fix for his ego. He has said that using those substances was never about how he felt about himself. It was strictly business, a means to a specific professional end. That distinction mattered, because the career would eventually end, and the substances would not be as easy to walk away from. There is a smaller story within this era that reflects how isolated competitors like Yates were at the time. He has described seeking proper medical oversight for what he was doing to his body and being turned away by a doctor who had no framework for treating a competitive bodybuilder on performance-enhancing. When that same doctor later saw him in person at an international multi-sport event in the mid-1980s, the doctor reportedly acknowledged that Yates already understood his own blood work and physiology better than the physician did. Yates has said he believes he was the only bodybuilder he personally knew who was getting regular blood tests during that decade. Everyone else was proceeding without that information. He was not, but only because he built that system himself out of necessity with almost no outside guidance. Before that ending came, Yates pushed his body into territory far darker than most fans realized. Weeks before his final Mr. Olympia title defense in 1997, Yates has described a life-threatening health scare. He has said he coughed up blood in the lead-up to that contest, a serious warning sign for anyone, let alone a man preparing to defend 6 straight titles on stage. He has stated that the extreme training and substance use of that era had pushed his kidney and liver readings to dangerous levels. It was not an isolated incident. His final competitive year was also marked by serious physical injury. A torn triceps just 3 weeks before that same Olympia, layered on top of the internal warning signs his body was already showing. He still competed. He still won. But it was becoming clear even to Yates himself that his body could not keep absorbing this level of damage indefinitely. In 1997, at the peak of his powers and holding 6 Olympia titles in a row, Dorian Yates retired. On paper, it was the undefeated champion choosing his own ending instead of being dethroned. In reality, what followed is a part of his story that gets far less attention, and it is central to understanding his later perspective. Yates has said that when he retired, he made himself a promise. The steroids were for the career, and once the career ended, so would the steroids. According to his own account, stopping abruptly led to a depression that lasted roughly a year. This was not disappointment about retiring or sadness about leaving the stage, but a prolonged low that he did not fully expect and did not know how to process. For over a decade, his body had been operating in a specific chemical state to support an extreme physical existence. Removing that all at once changed not only how he looked, but how he felt mentally, in ways that surprised him. For a long time, he resisted addressing it, because in his mind, returning to any form of hormone therapy meant breaking the promise he had made to himself. He has since described that mindset as flawed, treating getting back on anything as a personal failure rather than a legitimate medical decision. Eventually, he began testosterone replacement therapy, at a much lower health-focused dose than during his competitive years. By his own account, within about a month of starting it, his mental outlook improved significantly. It is a notably human detail within a career built on extreme physical achievement. The 6-time Mr. Olympia, known for one of the most feared physiques in the sport's history, dealing privately with his mental health once competition ended. That period appears to mark a turning point in his approach to health overall. In the years since retirement, Yates has shifted his outlook substantially. The man once known for pushing his body past typical limits in pursuit of size began practicing yoga daily, describing it alongside meditation as a significant change in how he approaches his health. He has spoken about using plant-based substances such as ayahuasca for spiritual and reflective purposes, describing them as tools for introspection rather than performance enhancement. He deliberately reduced his own muscle mass, prioritizing longevity and daily well-being over size. Her relationship with cannabis reflects a similar shift in perspective. His use of it predates his bodybuilding career. In an appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, he argued for its legalization, citing what he described as anti-cancer properties, along with its relaxing effects and benefits for respiratory capacity. His life outside the gym changed as well. After retiring, Yates moved into business, co-founding an athletic apparel and bodybuilding book company with training partners Mike and Ray Mensa in the mid-1990s. He later built and sold his stake in a supplement company that carried his name, launched his own peptide and pre-workout ventures, and eventually established his own nutrition brand. He He relocated to Marbella, Spain, where he now lives with his wife, Brazilian fitness model Glosar Galferreira, whom he met at the Arnold Classic in 2008. The competitor, once known as the Shadow, who declined to confirm whether he was even entering competitions, became a public figure, a podcast host, a frequent interview subject, and one of the sport's most cited senior figures. In the years since his final Olympia win, Yates has become one of the sport's most consistent voices, cautioning newer athletes about the pattern he experienced firsthand. He has stated that bodybuilders today use significantly higher doses of certain compounds than were common even in his own era, describing amounts that would have been considered excessive by 1990 standards, and noting that recreational users who do not compete are now taking multiples of what he and his rivals used at the sport's highest level. He has distinguished between using enhancement as a professional tool for elite competition and using it recreationally to pursue a physical image, stating that when self-worth becomes tied to physical size, discontinuing use later can resemble withdrawal from an addiction rather than a simple lifestyle change. In some interviews, he has compared certain long-term substances favored by modern lifters to a slow-developing health risk, arguing that short-term gains do not offset the potential long-term costs. That perspective carries particular weight given his own history using those same tools to build a 6-time Mr. Olympia career. Though his current approach to hormone therapy reflects the same shift in philosophy. Rather than maintaining the elevated levels required during competition, Yates has described using only small, health-focused microdoses of testosterone in retirement, a fraction of his competitive protocol with the stated goal of remaining functional and healthy rather than building additional muscle. Based on his own comments across multiple interviews, his repeated message is not that building muscle was a mistake or that his career was not worthwhile, it is more specific. The issue, in his retrospective view, was allowing the pursuit of size to become tied to his sense of identity, to the point where his physique was not simply something he had built, but something he felt he needed in order to feel like himself. That is why he has said stopping affected him more than he anticipated, and why he now encourages younger lifters to consider whether they are building a physique for a defined purpose, or because they are uncertain who they are without it. A teenager who found structure and identity in a gym, after a difficult start in life, went on to dominate his sport more completely than nearly anyone in its history, only to find, once competition ended, that the identity built around his physique did not automatically carry into the next stage of his life. 6 Olympia titles did not resolve the question of who he was apart from them. It took stepping away from the routine, the substances, and the stage for him to address that question directly. Yates has indicated that the story does not end at his competitive record. 6 consecutive Olympia titles and a reputation still referenced by other athletes decades later represent by most measures a complete career narrative, but by his own account that was not the actual conclusion. The later chapter involved a man in his mid-30s managing an unplanned depression, working through where the competitor ended and the individual began. It involved a gradual and at times reluctant decision to treat his own health as worth protecting on its own terms, not as a means to a title but because he would continue living in that body long after competitive judging ended. That is the side of the Shadow that did not appear on bodybuilding posters, not the competitor who avoided public appearances before contests to unsettle rivals, but the retired athlete who, once competition ended, had to address questions about his own identity. He spent over a decade building a body capable of dominating any competitor on stage. It took nearly as long afterward to develop a sense of self that did not depend on that physique. Given 6 Olympia titles, a life-threatening health scare, and a year-long depression he did not anticipate, his account suggests that physical dominance alone does not determine a person's sense of identity once competition ends. Yates has described learning this after the fact, and has suggested it is worth considering the question earlier rather than later.